Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly edition of the Wrap. I'm Laura Leslie, WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief.
And I am Will Doran, WRAL State Government Reporter.
And it's not been that crazy a week this week, but the story that keeps on giving is still ticking, and that is the story of the unsettled Supreme Court race between Democrat Allison Riggs and Republican challenger Jefferson Griffin. Will, you've been all over this story. What's new this week?
This is the story with just unlimited twists and turns. So, it is currently progressing in both state court and federal court at the same time, which is pretty rare as someone who covers lots of these, political lawsuits. We don't really see that happen a lot. But that's what's happening in this case. And so we have had filings that everyone has been putting in both the state Supreme Court and in federal appeals court. But really I think probably the most interesting thing that I've noticed this week is that everyone is just stocking up on lawyers who have really no experience in North Carolina law, North Carolina courtrooms, but have plenty of experience at the U.S. Supreme Court. And so that kind of tells me that everyone just expects this to eventually go to the U.S. Supreme Court and get settled there, or at least have the U.S. Supreme Court decide, who should be in charge of eventually hearing this case. Should it be a federal case? Should it be a state case? And so I think that's kind of been one of the most interesting things that I saw happening this week was just everyone stocking up on these, big name, heavy hitter DC lawyers.
I'm surprised, I guess, that this would need to go to the U.S. Supreme Court to be decided. I mean, it seems like lately most things seem to end up in the U.S. Supreme Court. And I don't, it doesn't seem like a very efficient way to run a railroad, if you ask me. But, in this case, it was the Republicans, though, who wanted to keep it in state court initially, right? And it was the Democrats who wanted to push it into federal court.
Exactly. This is, Griffin's challenges are pretty much identical, or at least the bulk of his challenges, pretty much identical to a lawsuit that the Republican Party brought during the 2024 elections that got shot down in federal court. And one of the main reasons why it got shot down was because the judges ruled, hey, this is too close to the election. And that was, before the election was even over. So, kind of the Democratic argument is like, well, if it was too close to the election to change the rules several months before the election, you certainly can't change the rules after the election is over and then punish people for not having followed those rules. Republicans, of course, say that they don't think that this should be in federal court. Like you said, Laura, they want this to be in state court. And of course, Republicans have a majority on the state Supreme Court. So, that would potentially be a political benefit to them as well if it gets heard in the state court.
I'm about to say they have a majority on both courts.
Yes.
Both Supreme Courts, sorry.
Oh, Supreme Courts, yes. Yeah. But, the U.S. Supreme Court actually, people remember it was about a year, 18 months ago, the independent state legislature case.
Oh, I was there for that, yeah.
Exactly. You were up in D.C. covering that, and that was something that, people thought, it was another kind of fringe legal theory being pushed by the Republican Party to give themselves more power over, redistricting and just elections in general. And a lot of people, cynically predicted that the Supreme Court would rule in the legislature's favor just because they're all Republicans, but and ruled against the legislature on that one. The U.S. Supreme Court did. So, political partisanship doesn't necessarily guarantee that a ruling will go a certain way, although it can certainly inform it.
Yeah, history would indicate it's usually a pretty good predictor. However, in this case, you pointed out the other day, I mean, even some of the folks who had been generally supportive of conservative causes and of concerns about election security in particular have started to sort of question this entire, the sort of the logical integrity of this entire attempt, right?
Yeah, some of the election integrity folks are starting to get a little frustrated with the arguments that that Jefferson Griffin is making in this case. We even saw at the state Supreme Court, one of the Republican justices did dissent and say that he wouldn't have allowed this to move forward at all. That was Justice Richard Dietz saying that, that you can't do this. You can't go and kind of just retroactively take people's votes away after an election. So, there's not even unanimity among the Republican justices on the Supreme Court as to whether or not to even hear the case, let alone, how they're going to rule on it. So it's going to be interesting to watch, especially as we move forward. Jefferson Griffin has now said, he's told the state Supreme Court, well, if you don't want to use my strategy of throwing out all 60,000 ballots I'm challenging, how about you only look at a few thousand that were cast by overseas voters? And he has, different reasons that he's challenging the overseas voters. But of course, that's also, maybe a more politically attractive path for justices who want to put him on the court, but are afraid of the political backlash of throwing out 60,000 ballots.
What struck me about that filing was, though, that it's like, okay, so you could just try doing these, and if that's enough that I can win, then you don't have to go to the next step. And then you can challenge these next ones, and if that's enough that I can win, then you don't have to go to the next step. And it's just like, wow, it was I've never seen a filing like that.
Yeah. We've asked Jefferson Griffin to do interviews on this or to comment on it. So far, he's declined to comment, saying that he doesn't think it's appropriate for sitting judges to comment on pending litigation. That is not the same tack that Allison Riggs has taken. She's been commenting on this. Her parents have been commenting on this. Laura, you spoke with her parents this week.
Very nice people. Yeah, they showed up at a protest that was held on Tuesday, a very chilly protest, I might add, on the square outside of the state Supreme Court building. And these were folks with sort of a left-leaning voter rights group. And they basically made it their goal was to read out all 60,000 plus names of voters whose ballots are being challenged in this race, not in all races, just in this race. And so they started at 6 o'clock in the morning, and apparently by 11 o'clock at night, they still hadn't finished. So they were going to have to finish the rest and put it up on a video. I mean, it takes a long time to read that many names, but they were trying to call attention to the sheer scale of what's happening, which they say is pure political disenfranchisement. Of course, the Republicans, having a different take on that, are saying that this is, they called it needlessly inflammatory rhetoric, and saying that this is a clear problem with the administration of elections and nobody is blaming the voters. But that was cold comfort to the voters, including the parents of Allison Riggs. You might remember she was appointed to the Supreme Court. This is their first chance to vote for her on the Supreme Court. And they were happy to cast their ballots. They said they voted for many, many years. There's never been a problem until this particular race. And yes, they would really like their votes to count. So we did a couple of stories on the air this week with talking to voters, them and others, about how just sort of surreal this is, because most of these folks who are being challenged are folks who voted for a long time. And, and imagine, if you will, just, getting a postcard out of nowhere saying, oh, hey, we're challenging your vote. And you're like, I don't know why. So if you look online, we've got a pretty good rundown of what you can do to A, see if your name is on that list, and B, what to do if your name is on that list, starting with making sure that your election record, registration, etc. is correct. But anyway, so that pretty much sums up that story for the week. But we're looking ahead for a week from Monday, right? There's supposed to be arguments at that point, or no?
Yes, the federal appeals court is going to hear the oral arguments late January. So yeah, we're gonna probably know what the federal courts want to do before we hear from the state Supreme Court, because the state Supreme Court, their first oral arguments aren't until mid-February. And those are already calendared out at this point. I'm not sure if they can add this case to those. They might have to wait until even later in the spring to add this.
Is this the case is this a case where the person who acts first gets to basically precedence?
Both of these are kind of moving at a very quick pace in both state and federal courts. A lot of times, judges will give, one side, 30 days to respond to the other side. That's not happening in these cases. They're saying, okay, you respond, and then we're going to need your response 3 days after that or 4 days after that. So they're really trying to hurry this thing along. So, this is not moving forward like a normal court case. Everyone wants to get this done as quickly as possible. And it might just kind of be a race to the finish to see whether the state courts or the federal courts can get down the first ruling. But then if we end up in a case where there are two separate and contradictory rulings on this, say the state Supreme Court rules in Griffin's favor and the federal court rules in Riggs's favor, then how does the Board of Elections decide what to do? If you've got one judge telling you have to certify the race in favor of Allison Riggs, and you've got another judge telling you have to certify the race in favor of Jefferson Griffin,
or you have to have a new election or something,
or have a new election or whatever they decide to do. I'm not envious of the position that the State Board of Elections would find themselves in if that were to happen, and they have to figure out what to do. And then that's probably where you might end up at the U.S. Supreme Court, with that court just needing to make a ruling on, who to listen to. But this is all predicting the future. We don't know, what's going to happen in this case yet. So,
well, let's take this opportunity to stop for a quick break to hear from our sponsors, if there are any this week. Let's hope. And so just hang around, and we'll be right back with you. All right, welcome back to the wrap for this week. I'm Laura Leslie here with Will Doran talking about the week that was. So Governor Stein this week sort of kept going with his executive orders that he started the day after he was inaugurated. The executive order he announced yesterday, Thursday it would be, had to do with reproductive rights. And a lot of it was really, really similar to what Governor Roy Cooper did in an executive order following the overturning of Roe v. Wade back in 2022. But there are a couple of differences, and one of which had to do with what they call pregnancy resource centers.
Yeah, these are the groups often run by conservative Christian organizations that in recent years have been getting tens of millions of dollars in funding for the state legislature through DHHS, through grants that DHHS gives out. And so the legislature has been telling Health and Human Services, hey, pass this money along to these pregnancy centers. And so Josh Stein comes out in his executive order and is now telling DHHS, which he controls, hey, y'all are also going to need to put out more information to women on what these centers do and what they don't do. And this comes as these groups have been pretty heavily criticized by liberals in recent years for potentially being misleading to people. There's been obviously huge fights in the legislature over whether or not we should be funding them. But the Republicans have won those fights, and we are funding them.
Yeah, and the allegations are pretty much tarring them all with the same brush. But people who are, in that line of work at the pregnancy resource centers, make it clear that they are not all alike. And there are some of them that actually have medical doctors on staff and provide medically accurate information. And there are others that are pretty much just sort of an outreach of a local church and don't have those kind of resources available. So, he's basically saying under state law, this goes back to, I think, 2011 or 2012, the DHHS has to provide information about these as one of the resources it provides on its website and in print about resources available to pregnant women, right? And they want to make this, they'd like to look at these as an alternative to abortion. But as you said, liberals have been very critical of them because there have been cases, for example, a lot of them advertise what's called, medication abortion reversal, which is something that the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists says that's not even a thing. right? It's unproven by science, right? It's just not, it's not factual. So, it depends, I suppose, on the center you're talking about. But he's not calling on anybody to crack down on them, notably. He's simply saying that DHHS needs to do a better job at differentiating its information about them from other ones. Because I will tell you, I mean, I did a story on this, and it looks like when you look online, it's not real clear what the difference is, to be honest, from DHHS website.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and those groups weren't the only thing that Stein changed up from the order that Cooper gave in 2022. He also said that DHHS needs to basically ensure access to birth control in North Carolina.
How do they do that, though? I mean,
well, some of these things are, perhaps more political posturing than others.
Aspirational, yeah.
Yeah, Stein tried to make this a big point in his campaign against Mark Robinson for governor, saying that, hey, if Mark Robinson is elected governor, he and Republicans in the legislature are going to try banning birth control. Now, Robinson strongly objected to that. Some Republican lawmakers strongly objected to that. But, Stein also pointed to, Clarence Thomas's concurrence in the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade that said, we should get rid of guarantees for birth control. And so, this is, clearly Stein just, continuing to beat that drum, that he's concerned that, birth control access could come under fire from conservatives, whether that's, the Supreme Court or, whatever other realm that may come from.
I know. I mean, to be fair about that, number one, Project 2025, which you may believe is or is not much of an indication of what the Trump administration wants to do, did call for basically making mifepristone, which is one of the two drugs used for medication abortion, basically unapproving that drug, which would make medication abortion very, very difficult to come by across the whole U.S., right? Doesn't matter what state laws are about it. And then the other thing is we have seen in some of the other states with abortion bans, for folks who believe that abortion begins at conception, IUDs, for example, are, being debated as to whether or not those should be legal, because those prevent a fertilized egg from implanting. And so they're saying it's already alive at that point. So basically it's doing the same thing as an abortion, so it should not be legal. Now, I don't know if any states have actually gone that far yet, but the conversation has definitely been had.
Yeah. Well, and on that same note of, now this is totally up to the states. That's what the Supreme Court has ruled. Cooper had previously said that, okay, North Carolina, we are not going to extradite anybody who's in North Carolina to some other state for some sort of abortion-related crime if whatever they did or were accused of doing is legal in North Carolina. Say you gave someone information about how to obtain an abortion, or you drove someone to go get an abortion, things like that, legal to do in North Carolina, but if they were, wanted in another state, we wouldn't extradite them. Stein is continuing that, and he actually added on to that, saying that, state law enforcement agencies are also now not allowed to arrest someone. Say they get pulled over by the highway patrol for speeding and they find that they have, warrants from, whatever other state, Texas, Alabama, whatever, for something related to abortion. His executive order says that as long as whatever they're accused of in that other state is not also illegal in North Carolina, then state law enforcement officials may not arrest them on those warrants.
That seems like a complicated thing for a state trooper to figure out on the side of a highway at 11 o'clock at night. But okay, all right. I'm just saying. I think it also accounts for, or would apply for, warrants that come in from other states for people. Like, for example, in some of the states, it's a crime to drive somebody across state lines to get an abortion. So, it could be that somebody could have a warrant issued for their arrest for that here in,
right. Because here in North Carolina, we're one of the only states in the South, that, allows abortion past 6 weeks, our cut up 12 weeks. So, we've actually seen that, especially like places in Charlotte that are, right over the state line from South Carolina, really saw a surge in, demand at, Planned Parenthoods and other centers like that after after those new laws went into place.
Yeah. Something else that happened this week involving Stein was, well, it wasn't his fault, but this was this week up in Asheville, and so this has to do with the Helene victims. And I guess FEMA has been putting them up in hotels and temporary housing, and had extended their stay for a couple of days. Due to the winter weather, but somehow some wires got crossed and a bunch of people actually got thrown out of their, or basically told they had to leave.
Yeah, just a few days ago when it was freezing here in the Triangle. So, I imagine it was very cold out in Western North Carolina. And you're right, these people, their hotel vouchers were going to expire, but because of the cold weather, FEMA extended it for them to allow them to keep staying in the hotel. But for whatever reason, either FEMA forgot to tell the hotels about this or forgot to hit the right button on, the vouchers, or it's I think a little unclear as to how exactly they screwed this up, but they screwed it up. And a lot of people got thrown out of their hotels, started calling, our U.S. senators, our U.S. representatives, which is a great idea. Yeah,
What you do. Yeah. Yeah.
and, credit to our politicians. People like to complain about politicians, but they stepped up. They got FEMA's attention. Senator Tillis, Senator Budd, Governor Stein, they're Democrats and Republicans, but they were all kind of working together on this to pressure FEMA to get this fixed and get those people back into housing. And then Stein also came out and said that he's now calling on FEMA to really extend those hotel vouchers for months until September.
Well, FEMA had said that they would extend them until March, I think, initially.
Right.
And Stein wanted it for a little bit longer than that, just saying, like you said, people need a warm place to stay, it's cold, and they need some kind of ability to plan.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, we were just talking about Stein's executive orders on abortion. His first executive orders that he did were all Helene related, and aimed at getting temporary housing built and things like that. But of course, that's just temporary. And, if people's houses are still destroyed, then, maybe they do want to continue staying in a hotel instead of, in a trailer.
Or depending on how quickly they can move trailers in there, too. It hasn't been all that quick so far, but we're waiting to see what happens on that.
Yeah.
Speaking of Tillis, just one thing to point out about this week or mention, there was a call this week about 400 or so North Carolina doctors are joining on a national letter from the Committee to Protect Healthcare to Congress, senators, I should say, specifically the Senate Finance Committee, asking them to not approve the nomination of RFK Jr. to become the U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary. North Carolina doctors, understandably, calling on Senator Tillis directly because Tillis is, of course, up for election in 2026, and there's some thought that that he may be vulnerable.
Yeah, Tom Tillis is by no means a never Trumper. He supports Trump on a lot of things, but in the on the spectrum of Republican senators, he's probably one of the more likely ones to buck Trump on some issues. And so, people who are opposed to some of these more controversial nominees see him as, I guess one of the more likely no votes on the Republican side. I will note that Tillis has come out very publicly in support of some other controversial Trump nominees like Pam Bondi for AG and Kash Patel to run the FBI. Has, said pretty strongly that he supports them and is, looking forward to working with them. I'm not sure that he's said anything similar on RFK, so maybe that gives a glimmer of hope to some of these opponents, but it's going to be interesting because he's going to have a tough re-election battle in 2026.
First on the right, and then on the left, he's already got a challenger, right?
Yes, he's got his first challenger for a GOP primary, Andy Nielsen, who ran for lieutenant governor as a Republican 25 years ago, back in 2000, lost in the GOP primary then. I don't think has been too active in politics since then.
I gather he was active and trying to sort of put together like a shadow GOP convention along with Bob Orr in 2016, and that was the year that that Trump was nominated for the first time by the GOP.
Yeah, he's very much on the more, moderate or centrist Republican side, which, I think Tillis's main potential weakness in a GOP primary would come from the opposite side, come from the MAGA crowd. And we haven't seen anyone saying yet that they're going to be challenging him from the right. Obviously, there's a lot of talk, immediately after the 2024 elections, would Mark Robinson potentially primary Tillis? He has, so far said that's not on his radar. But there's other potential challengers in the wings out there as well. But yeah, if Tillis makes it out of the GOP primary, then he's going to have a tough battle in the general election, because just the nature of America, we like to often vote against whatever party's in power, and midterms often go poorly for whichever party controls the White House. And right now, that is Tom Tillis's party. So,
and not to mention that if he has a primary challenge, that's going to push him to the right, which is going to make him less electable to the rest of the state.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. I don't know that he's really, has any big name Democratic challengers yet. Former Congressman Wiley Nickel has said that he's thinking of running. Obviously, a lot of people speculate that maybe Roy Cooper will jump into the race, but that's just pure speculation at this point.
All right, I think that's about it for the week. Anything else I'm forgetting?
Nope. We will be back next week or in the future under the new Trump administration. Trump getting sworn in on Monday, so
we'll see.
We'll have a lot of reporting on what he does in his first couple of days in office.
I was about to say, next week could be a long one, right? It could be a crazy week. So, all right, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll catch you next week here on the WRAL.